Hey everyone, welcome to the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer, and I'm so excited to bring this brand new show to you. Now, I believe that the world needs more leaders, now more than ever before. So I came up with this idea for the Leadmore podcast to go back and look at and study and get to know the best leaders of the past and the present so that we can create more leaders for the future. In this inaugural episode, I got a chance to sit down and interview the 32nd governor of our great state of South Dakota, Mr. Dennis Daugaard. We talked about what do you look for and how do you spot upcoming leaders. I asked him how he got his start as a leader and if he ever saw himself being a politician. And we talked about how to lead during a time of crisis, which is on everyone's mind today. You're also going to hear what book he just read and what he says is the best perk of being the governor of South Dakota. So please join me in listening to the very first episode of the Leadmore podcast, where I, John T. Meyer, sit down with Governor Dennis Daugaard. Have a listen. Well, welcome everyone to the show. I'm so excited for today's episode. We have one of the great leaders. He was a business development person in a nonprofit, an executive director, a state senator, a lieutenant governor, and then, of course, we all know him as South Dakota's 32nd governor, Mr. Dennis Daugaard. Welcome to the show, Dennis.
Thank you, John. Good to be with you.
All right. Well, I have to tell you first. So this show is about this. The premise of the show originally started Mount Leadmore with the idea of asking people who's their Mount Rushmore of leadership, right? Just like people will debate their Mount Rushmore of baseball or football greats or South Dakotans. And what I can say when I asked South Dakotans that question, kind of as I started to come up with this idea for the show, your name came up very frequently as being on people's Mount Rushmore of leadership. So I'm honored to have you here today. And I want to start at the beginning. Where I think a lot of leaders debate this question of whether leaders are born or if they're made, right? And so at what age what was your first leadership role, whether it be a job or a school, a class project, or when would you first think back to remembering when you became a leader?
I would say nominally a leader was when I was in high school. I was the student body president.
Okay.
That really wasn't much of a leadership job because, you have all your teachers telling you what to do. It's more following, being a leader in name. I'd say in college, I was the president of my fraternity. And at that time, it was a pretty big fraternity. We had about 100 members. And it was it was at a time when fraternities were very active at the University of South Dakota.
Sure.
So that was a job with a fair amount of responsibility. Traditionally, houses would have a house mother who lived in the house and was sort of the matriarch of the boys, college boys. We did not have one. And so the president of the fraternity really was responsible for finances, responsible for making sure that the men who lived in the house didn't mistreat it and took care of it and cleaned it and maintained it and hire the cook and do all those things. I would say that was a real leadership role.
And was that an elected, did people nominate, your peers nominated you, or how did that happen?
Yes, it was. It was one where the other members of the fraternity wanted to be the leader. And I said, yes, I would do that. And I said, actually, I really didn't have much money in college and I always had to work jobs. And so I said, I can't do it. I don't have the time because I've got these jobs. And they said, well, we will pay you to be the president of the fraternity, which had not been done before. I said, okay, then I'll do it because then I can quit one of my other jobs.
Yeah, it was a win-win. That's perfect.
Yeah.
And then I know you went off to law school. And at what point I don't even know, when did political ambitions set in at that point, or was it later in life that you decided to emerge as a leader in the political realm?
It was really later. I majored in government at what is now called political science in most universities.
Sure.
But mainly because I had some scholarship support there. It's not because I have, this is going to be my path. It was more, I've got to major in something. I don't know what to major in. Okay, I'll take government because you'll give me a scholarship. All right. But after that, of course, I reached my junior year in college, and I was looking ahead to my senior year, and I thought, well, what do you do with this degree? You can't really get much of a job with a political science bachelor's degree. So that's when I decided to go to law school, did that. And then it was really quite a bit later. Linda and I were living on the farm already. We had kids, and I got a call one evening from someone who was recruiting people to run for the legislature. And so Linda and I talked about it. I talked to the executive director of Children's Home Society, and they were both supportive. And so then I ran for the Senate, and then one thing led to another after that.
Yeah. So this is, 1996, 1997. And who would have thought that, a decade later or 14 years later, you'd be governor? I mean, wow.
Certainly not me.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think so much of sort of the origin of leaders happens when somebody delegates or sort of appoints. So somebody called you, recognized you as trustworthy guy, lots of integrity, leadership, and you sort of took the call. And that moment probably changed your life.
It really did. And I think that is true of a lot of legislators I know. In fact, I have made many such calls.
Sure.
Encourage people to run. And I would say I'm successful less than half of the time.
Okay.
Many people are willing to lead, but they don't have time.
Yeah.
They're committed in other areas, or I think there's also a fear of losing. Sure. When you're talking about an elective leadership position, no one likes to lose. It's an embarrassment. You spend money and a lot of time and then don't win. It's a ego blow.
Yeah, totally. And so what are the characteristics, like, as you find people and make those phone calls, what do you look for in a leader? Or even when you were building out, say, your cabinet or your staff, what are the characteristics that you identify in someone that you think could be a great leader?
Well, emotional maturity, people who can control their emotions and not stifle them in the sense that they're ready to explode because they've been stifling them, but in the sense that they don't get too worked up or jammed up about things that are at the end of the day not that consequential, and or are rather short duration in concern. So emotional maturity is important. Mm-hmm. I think you have to have someone who's a good listener, because the world's complicated. And if I find somebody or I come across someone who is absolutely sure about themselves too much, then I think this person is too insecure to open themselves up to new information. And they are bound to make decisions that are impulsive or not well-founded. So you've got to be a good listener. You got to have a work ethic.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off there.
To set the example too, and live the example. I think people are very disappointed in leaders who portray themselves as one thing, and then when the cameras are off or someone's out of the room, then they betray the fact that they're a little bit different than they portrayed themselves. And if you're not willing to be the same person 24/7, then maybe you wouldn't be a very good leader.
That's a great one. Yeah. So like vulnerability, it sounds like when you talked about being able to admit that you're wrong and listening and know when it's time to maybe change your mind.
Humility. Yeah.
That's good.
You got to have that humility of your own foibles and limitations.
So related to that, I'll turn that question to you. A thing that we do here at Lemonly when we hire, we ask people, potential candidates, what's your superpower? Like and we define that as sort of, what's the one thing you will do better on the team than everyone else? And so I like this question because, as you know, lots of South Dakotans, we're not very good about bragging about ourselves. We have a lot of humility. So if I were to ask you, what's your superpower as a leader, what would you say that is?
I would say I'm a good listener. I think if you talk to people who are present in meetings that I lead or in which I participate, they will say I'll often not speak until the end. Particularly if you're the leader, you really shouldn't betray your leaning on a decision until the end, because then people won't be frank with you, especially if they want to be respectful. So generally they'll reflect and support, or often they'll reflect and support what they think you want to hear. And of course, that's the worst.
Sure.
You want to hear their candid opinion so that it can inform yours. So you've got to be a listener, not a speaker.
And I imagine when you're governor of a state, that everybody wants to probably agree and say yes, and I agree, and you're 100% correct. I'm sure it's hard to get straight facts sometimes from people.
Right, it is. People want your approval, and so they want to tell you what you want to hear. So be a good listener, I'd say to a leader. Be a good listener and wait until the end to make a decision. Because as soon as you even lean one way, then you're inclined to discount information that doesn't support that leaning. So literally try to listen and be deliberate about saying, okay, I'm not going to decide. I'm not going to think about what I think is best yet. I'm going to try and keep an open mind until I must decide, and then do so.
That's great. One thing I want to do with this show is try to get a understanding kind of behind the scenes of how leaders live their life and what their routines are. And so tell me a little bit, and maybe it's changed, maybe it hasn't changed from being governor to being retired. Unpack what's your morning routine? Are you a morning person? Do you do the same thing every day? Kind of unpack how you like to plan your day.
Well, it depends. Lately, I've been doing so much outside work that I don't do any exercising in the morning, because otherwise I'm too tired to do all the work. So, but if I'm in the wintertime, for example, I'd get up and typically start out with exercise. Do the treadmill. I don't run anymore because I'm getting too old for the joint pounding. So I walk on the treadmill, pretty good pace for 30 minutes or so. And then 2 or 3 days a week, I'll lift weights. Nothing to be Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you can see I'm but yeah, you've got to maintain some muscle strength, or when you want to use muscles, they won't be there for you. So I do that. And during my time in the Capitol, then I would go into work by 7:30 or 8. I'd get to the Capitol. And then the first thing I would do is read. There was always some papers to read, but also lots of mail to read and respond to. And South Dakota is still a small enough state that the governor can respond to people who write. Now, I won't write that letter myself. Someone will draft it for me, oftentimes subject matter experts.
Sure.
And they'll draft the letter, but I'll look at it and say, is it responsive to the question that was asked? I'll read the letter and say, is this responsive? And is it respectful? And is it doing the job it should? Is it in the tone that I would use?
Sure.
And then, so sign a lot. And then it was packed with meetings. As a leader, I think if you have a group of people who work directly for you, you should have regular meetings with them. And some leaders will say, no, I have an open door policy. So Bill, if you want to come and see me, Mary, if you want to come and see me, you might be my direct reports, but my door is open all the time. Come and see me. Well, people don't.
Of course they don't. Yeah.
Don't. So you have to have a periodic meeting with Bill and with Mary.
Would you do those as like one-on-one meetings then, or do you do it as a cabinet?
Right.
Or okay?
Both. We had. I had what I called the executive committee, which was the lieutenant governor, the chief financial officer for the state, the chief of staff for the state, and then several of the cabinet members that I thought were particularly good leaders. So I had either 5 or 6 or 7 members of the executive committee, and I would meet one-on-one with them every week for a half hour.
Okay.
And then we would meet as a group every week for about an hour to 2 hours, depending upon how busy we were. And then the rest of the day was generally filled with meetings that were topic driven. So if there was something going on, particularly driven by constituents, someone wants to come in and talk about highway funding, or we've got an issue, we've got coronavirus, or we've got, in my term of office, we had a measles outbreak, we had Ebola threatening the United States, including people from countries that had Ebola visiting South Dakota. How do you deal with those people? How do you track them? How do you be sure they aren't bringing Ebola with them? Things like that. So you have meetings, and that fills the day. And then part of being a leader is being present in those, geographic areas.
Sure.
Being around the state. And so several times a week, I'd be out in other areas of the state. I think it's important you don't lead from the high castle and never come out and see people that have elected you. Your bosses, better go see your bosses a little bit.
Yeah, everybody's got a boss, right?
Yeah.
Even the governor. And you touched on that point that I wanted to go to, so we'll talk about it. Crisis, leading during crisis. You had some. We have a big one right now. Maybe you're glad to be doing landscaping right now, or I don't know. Do you wish you were there tackling this? I mean, this is a big one. What have you learned through? All leaders get forged through crisis. What did you learn how to handle that? Something like this.
Well, first of all, and I touched on it once, you have to be present. Mm-hmm. People who are worried about something, they want to see you.
Yep.
And and you can't be just present by telephone or by television. You got to be physically present occasionally. I mean, not there all the times in the trenches, but you need to be out and about. So if there's a tornado in Wessington Springs, I needed to go there, because I know that the community wanted me to be there. They wanted me to see with my own eyes, and they wanted to be reassured by my presence that I knew they were in trouble and that I was there to help, and the state was there to help.
Sure.
So you need to be physically present and be seen. And then you also need to communicate. And now there again, part of it is being seen and communicating on the spot, but also communicate by telephone and television. Yep. So when we had the Missouri River flood, for example, in my first year in office, we did very much what you're seeing governors around the nation, including our governor, have periodic press conferences on television, so that people who were concerned and interested could hear directly from the leader what's going on and what's changing and what's being done. And then the third thing, I think, you need to be involved. You can't just be seen as present, listening, leading, communicating, but you need to be involved, because through involvement, you'll learn more and make better decisions. So during the flood, I spent my whole day at the Emergency Operations Center and on the levees and in the communities that were sandbagging. And I was involved in those decisions and involved in those meetings, even though they weren't requiring my decisions or my involvement. It just helped me to understand better. And I know I contributed in ways that people wouldn't have seen or known, but it made me a better leader because I was involved. So be present and be seen, communicate, and then be involved in the crisis.
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious on that second one. when you go to, say, Wesleyan Springs, and you look someone in the eye who's just lost their home and their livelihood, their life's been turned upside down, what do you say to those people? How do you manage, especially right now, science and fact, and telling the direct, hard truth, but also trying to be comforting and be present and show them that there's hope and there's light at the end of the tunnel? What do you say to someone like that who's just been through a moment like that?
Well, I think you just need to be empathetic with the person and be a listener. You have to let them tell you, and then reflect back to them what you've heard them say. Oh, John, so you just lost your house. Oh my gosh. And you lived there for 30 years. Oh my gosh. And it's where you grew up. And gosh, you reflect back and then demonstrate that you can feel their concern and their worry and their despair. And then when you communicate, it's more, I was talking more about communicating to the community.
Yeah, the larger group.
Getting people around, okay, at 9:00 tomorrow, we're going to have a meeting, and I'm going to speak, the mayor's going to speak, the fire chief is going to speak, and everybody's going to give information that may be of use to you, either to help you in your day or to inform you about information that we have gained and you may wish to know.
Who's your Mount Rushmore of leaders? Who inspired you? They could be people you know, people you don't know, living, dead. Who are your leaders that helped form who you are today?
Well, I think a couple of living leaders, I guess one is not living, but one was living during my years around here. Dave Loving was his name. He was the executive director of Children's Home Society.
Okay.
For about 20 years, I think. Let's see. Yeah, almost 20 years. And he recruited me to come work at Children's Home Society.
You were a banker before, right?
I was a banker, yes. And really, it was quite a different career. And I would have never thought about that as a career path for me. In fact, I struggled with it because I had been trained as a lawyer and I was working in the bank trust department. So I was applying my legal training and then here was this guy coming and I was on their board. That's how he knew me, a volunteer board member. And here he was saying, hey, I need somebody to lead our foundation. And do you know anybody? He said. And I thought, I said, well, gosh, nobody comes to mind. He said, well, how about you? So it was just a ruse,
He tricked you, yeah.
Yeah. And then, so I interviewed for the job and then I turned it down after they offered. I said, no, I got a good job at the bank and I got a, good future there. I'm a vice president now and Lynn and I have young children. And of course, some of my experience in the nonprofit world was with other nonprofits who were just living on a string and day to day. Yeah. So Lynn worried, gosh, we got all these kids and are you going to have health insurance? Are you going to have a job? So I turned it down. Yeah. And then I regretted it afterwards. And I went back to him. By that time, he found someone else who's quite good. And that person took the job. And I said, Dave, I made a mistake. I was thinking more about myself and what matters to me are some of the things you're doing. And I want a second chance if the opportunity ever comes up. And here's one thing he taught me. He had decided he wanted me in the organization. And he said, we will create a job for you. And I have done that several times now since then, where I found somebody I thought, wow, they'd be great in this organization. I'm going to see if I can get them to come work for us. And I'm going to make a job if I have to, create a job so that even if I don't have the job opening that is the best fit, I'll make something until that job opening comes along.
Yeah.
So that's one thing he taught me. But he he taught me a lot of things along the way and recruited me and was my mentor for, 15 years at Children's Home Society. And then when he retired, I took his job.
Got it.
And so that's one. Another one is Jeff Erickson. Jeff is living. Jeff's a retired bank president from Great Western Bank. He was very helpful to me as I was running, helped me understand how to raise money. He was interested in political life, never was in politics himself, but helped Mike Rounds, helped John. He was friends with John Thune, and he helped me raise money. But then it just happened that when I got elected as governor, he had just retired as president of Great Western Bank. And I think people have this vision that, you work, campaign, you're 24/7, you're making your way around seeking votes, and then you get elected, and then you say, I'm going to take a rest now because I don't take office for 2 months. Well, no, that's when you're really scrambling because you've got to hire a cabinet, you've got to hire a staff, you've got to create a budget, you've got to turn your political promises into legislation and proposals like for legislation. And so Jeff Erickson came to Pierre, moved into a motel, and led my transition for 2 months. And then since then, I've just seen him take a minority ownership position in a bank and become an important leader of the bank. I saw him become involved with a food company and very quickly became chairman of the board of the food company. And this is a national scale company, not a local. And he's just amazing, an amazing guy, so smart. And I just admire him. He's a great leader.
Yeah, I think there's some people who clearly are such good leaders. It doesn't matter what they do, right? They just rise to the top,
right.
no matter the occupation.
Who would think a banker could lead a political transition team and then a food company? It's just, such a disparate group of things, and yet a leader's a leader. And he was very good. Helped me too organize cabinet and organize the meetings. Very good. So that's two. Then two other ones, and this is kind of an obvious one, I guess. Abraham Lincoln, I think, deserves to be on Mount Rushmore. I've read Doris Kearns' book about a team of rivals and how he took his unlikely nomination, became the nominee of the Republican Party and became the president, and then took his rivals and put them on his team. All these political opponents that presumably you develop some enmity toward, and then you decide, no, I'm going to make him my team. And that was pretty impressive. But then, of course, keeping the country together during the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, all these things that were so important to our country, he did. And so he deserves to be on Mount Rushmore. And then the other guy also is on Mount Rushmore is Teddy Roosevelt. The thing that he did that really impresses me is he recognized that in this world, even back then, the world was changing and we were modifying and changing the earth so much, so fast, that there were wild places in the world that should be preserved and that he did preserve. So his conservation ethic really resonates with me, and I'm impressed by that.
Yeah, he was a big fan of the Dakotas. He'd come out here a lot.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good list. And two of them, of course, as you said, are on Mount Rushmore. I'm sure you got to spend a lot of time out there when you were governor.
A lot. Yeah.
That's a great list. One that you touched on that there with Lincoln and a team of rivals. One question I wanted to make sure we got to was, because I struggle with this, I think sometimes as CEO of a company, you got to bring along the next generation of leaders. But when do you decide, especially in politics, when do you decide that I'm going to disagree with my team or say your political party, because this one I'm going to dig my heels in and I'm not willing to compromise on? But sometimes you do have to sort of maybe let one go to either earn a little bit of trust or credit, or decide this one's not worth fighting for. I'm going to fight for a different issue or topic. How do you balance that sort of that give and take as a leader?
Yeah, I think you have to judge the relative importance of the various decisions. And there are some, as you say, they're not worth spending your political capital on.
Yep.
You'll make too many enemies. You might not win. And at the end of the day, you've expended that capital in a fruitless effort. So you just have to judge, is it worth it? Is it worth it? Then there are others that, in the grand scheme of things, you think, well, no, this is important enough that I have to try. And you have to, again, come to the calculus that you could win, that there's a fair chance that you could win. And if it's important, you just have to dig your heels in and go after it. So I can't really describe the process better than that.
Yeah,
but it does recognize, as you said, there are people who tilt at windmills all the time, and I shake my head and I think, why do you do that? You're just wasting your time, and you might feel good emotionally. I think a lot of people, that's why I say emotional maturity is an important attribute of a leader, because so many people let their emotions carry them into doing things that an outsider would look in and say, you are crazy to fight that battle. You are crazy to make that enemy when it does you no good. I look at people who make political decisions personal, and they personalize their opponent, and they call names. And I think to myself, my God, that might be emotionally satisfying, but tomorrow you might need John's vote on a wholly different bill. And is John going to support you now after you called him those names? No.
Yeah.
So,
it's not worth it.
No. So you have to make that judgment and decide what's worth a fight and what's not that important.
Yeah. So as you think about that and maybe reflect on your time in office, is there one decision that sticks out as maybe the hardest decision you had to make, or one that you made where you maybe went against your team of rivals or your partners?
Well, there were a couple, trying to raise teacher pay and raising taxes. When I ran the first time, I promised not to raise taxes, and I kept that promise during my first 4 years. My second 4 years, I had not made that promise, and whether it was raising taxes for teacher pay or another area where we raised taxes to increase highway funding, I thought, we really need to do those things. And I was unwilling. I'd seen too many politicians who were happy to spend, but unwilling to create the revenue. And so they would just borrow money. And that's a coward's way of addressing a problem. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to raise taxes or propose it. And in both cases, it was really quite close. We won by 1 or 2 votes in both cases. In fact, in the teacher pay, I think it was in our Blue Ribbon Task Force, we lost the first vote, and it was on reconsideration, or maybe that was the highway funding. We actually lost the first vote, and then the next day you can reconsider once. And we moved to reconsider, and then we convinced someone to come to our side, and barely won by 1 vote. So I guess that's the process.
And I'm sure those are things you look back and are probably really proud of, right? Those hard ones that you.
Yeah. I'm a little bit self-aware in that way. I think to myself, and this was true in Children's Home Society days, you would work and work and work and strategize and meet and have all these efforts that culminate in, say, $100,000 gift, which is a significant gift.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks later, you get a different $100,000 gift that just came out of the blue. Well, the first one was much more satisfying, much more exciting, because you did all the work to create it. So when you have to work really hard to accomplish something, when you are successful, it means a lot. And there might be something just as significant, but if you haven't had to work hard at it, it just doesn't feel quite as fulfilling.
Yeah, we talk about that at Lemonly. We say we have to celebrate our wins. I think you talked about work ethic. South Dakotans, we like to just put our head down and just do the job. But rarely do we step back and look up and actually say, hey, nice work. We really did a good job on that, and actually celebrate those wins.
Yes.
Well, I got a couple quick rapid fire ones, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. You mentioned reading. What book are you reading right now? Are you a reader?
I just finished This Tender Land, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the author. It's a guy from Minnesota, and it's very interesting to me because there are a number of parallels with my life or with this area. It's set in Minnesota. It's about it's set in the Depression years.
Okay.
And, it talks about Sioux Falls. It mentions Mankato, mentions St. Paul. The chief, the primary character in the novel, had a mother who was deaf, as was my mother.
Yep.
And so that person knew sign language, and so did I. So my sister saw the book, and she recommended it. And then Linda read it, and then Linda said, "Oh, you should read it too." And so I stayed up till midnight, night before last, reading it.
Oh, wow. So it was a page turner.
Very good. Yeah.
I know you tipped me off, and I know we both worked with somebody, a mutual friend, Ryan. He told me about this, about you, and I know I just saw it too. How many Diet Mountain Dews do you drink a day?
Oh, probably 4, 5.
Okay. So that's kind of your
probably an average of 4 or 5.
Okay. What's the best perk? I mean, being a leader is hard. We've talked about some of the parts. What's the best perk of being a governor that maybe most of us wouldn't know? Something that comes with it that's maybe something that you're missing nowadays.
Well, one perk I think people are aware of is the state plane. Okay. When you're the governor of a state as big geographically as South Dakota is, you cannot be present in the communities where you must be without a plane. Otherwise, you spend the whole day driving.
Yeah.
You drive 3 hours to Brookings, and then you spend an hour, and then you drive 3 hours to get back home, and there's 7 hours of your day.
That's your day. Yeah.
Eat lunch, and there's the rest. So if you've got an 8-hour day, you just can't do it without a plane. And that was such a privilege. And it was so fast, and the pilots really are excellent. So that was a perk. I'll say one other perk that was nice is the governor's mansion. It's just such a beautiful home. It's not very energy efficient, I would say. And in some rooms they're not very warm in the winter. I'll say that. It's designed. It's more art than shelter in some ways. But
a lot of hosting.
You can host people, and Linda's got 12. She's one of 12 kids in her family. So we were able to host Thanksgiving one year at the governor's mansion, and everybody fit.
That's great. Okay, we talked about, I know you have 6, soon to be 7 grandkids. You have 3 kids of your own. I'm a father of 2 little girls. What's a piece of advice that you used to always give your kids growing up, something that you'd always tell them?
Oh, golly. God, I should be able to answer that quickly. I even wrote things out for my daughter, Sarah. She said, "Dad, write down all the things that were important as a parent." we would always say to our kids when they complained or cried about something that they wanted, I would say, oh, now I can't do it, because what will that teach you if I give in now? That crying gets your way. And I can't teach you that. That would be a bad lesson. So now you've cried. Now I can't do it. So it became their fault that they couldn't have that candy or couldn't have that toy, or couldn't go outside when they needed to do their homework. And the other thing was always read before bedtime. Always read before bedtime. And then in the end, as our kids learned to read themselves, it became a privilege. Okay, Johnny, you can go to bed now and read for a half hour if you want to. I forget how it was kind of a
you can stay up if they read, or maybe go to bed if they don't read.
If you go to bed right now, you can read for a half hour in bed. If you go to bed right now, if you wait 5 minutes, then you can't read. And so we really got two things out of it. We got them to bed on time, and we got them to read. And of course, you want your kids to read again and again because it develops that skill.
Yeah.
So our kids would go to bed and read every night, and they're all very
one.
Yeah.
You can use that on your grandkids now. And then the last one, do you have a quote, or what's your favorite quote about leadership, or something that someone said that maybe you had on your desk or that you put on a wall?
Oh, Calvin Coolidge.
Okay.
Calvin Coolidge, and I might not be able to say it exactly, said, nothing takes the place of persistence. Talent will not. Unrewarded talent is almost a proverb. And now we're going to mix around. Genius will not. The world is full of unrewarded genius. And education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination are omnipotent. So I guess the point was, genius and talent and education are certainly important elements along the road to success, but none of them are any good if you don't have persistence and determination. You got to have the determination to keep working and working and working at something till you get it done.
Yeah, well, I think from what I know about your leadership style, and certainly your time as governor, that describes you very well. And so,
thank you.
Thanks so much for your time today. This was great to talk to such an amazing leader, to learn a little bit more about your story and some of the people that motivated and inspired you. So thank you so much, Governor, for your time. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it very much, John.
All right. Well, you take care. Say hi to Linda and be well. Be safe.
Okay. Bye-bye.